Gladiator II is the sequel to 2000's Gladiator, an all-time classic, one of my favorite movies ever made. That was directed by Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott returns once again to direct Gladiator 2. This one doesn't star Russell Crowe because Maximus died at the end of Gladiator. Instead, we follow Maximus and Lucilla's son, Lucius, this time played by Paul Mescal. This movie also has supporting turns from Connie Nielsen, Derek Jacobi, Pedro Pascal, and Denzel Washington. Years after witnessing the death of the revered hero Maximus at the hands of his uncle, Lucius is forced to enter the Colosseum after his home is conquered by the tyrannical emperors who now lead Rome with an iron fist. With rage in his heart and the future of the empire at stake, Lucius must look to his past to find strength and honor to return the glory of Rome to its people. Gladiator is one of those movies that's like Jurassic Park. It really begs the question, does it need a sequel? And in my eyes, no. Gladiator doesn't need a sequel, but there's always been plans for a Gladiator sequel, at least in the early 2000s after Gladiator had come out. There were so many different ideas, and when you really do the research as to what these different ideas were going to be, some of these ideas sounded really crazy. Like one of them was involving the Roman afterlife, bringing Russell Crowe back for Gladiator 2 and having Maximus fight demons in hell in the afterlife, or having Maximus come back as an immortal god from the afterlife and having him live an entire lifetime through like Vietnam and the Crusades, and the movie would end in present day. And thank God none of that happened, because that all sounds really friggin' stupid. I think natural progression would be where this movie begins, with Lucius, and I'm glad that this movie did that. I'm glad it didn't do any of those stupid ideas, but at the same time, as I was saying, I don't really think Gladiator needed a sequel. It's one of those movies that's such a classic. It should be able to stand on its own, just like Jurassic Park didn't need a sequel, let alone 5 sequels. And if you're going to make a sequel to a classic like Gladiator, you got to make the sequel as good or even better than the original, and Gladiator 2 isn't that. Unfortunately, I think Gladiator 2 is just a good movie. It's not going to be revered as a classic in the coming years. It's nowhere near as good as the first one. But don't take that as me giving this a negative review, because this is going to be a positive review despite some of my criticisms. I could use the question that Maximus asks in the first movie.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
And with Gladiator 2, I was entertained. Ridley Scott definitely knows how to build a movie based off scale and scope. This movie has a ginormous budget, somewhere in the $200 to $250 million range, and you could see where the money is being thrown at on the screen. Everything from the sets, the costume design, just the extras. Ridley Scott, at his age, 86 years old, is really probably the only director that can make a movie of this magnitude. Nobody else can make a historical epic as well as Ridley Scott does. He puts all the time and effort into these things. Even in his weaker ones like Napoleon or the theatrical cut of Kingdom of Heaven, the production value is always there with a Ridley Scott movie. That's what you know you're gonna get with a Ridley Scott movie. Even Exodus, Gods and Kings, that movie's not that great, but at least has the production value that you expect from a Ridley Scott movie. The scale and scope here is so much bigger than it is in the first one. You get Colosseum battles in this that feature rhinos and naval combat and sharks. So yeah, bigger doesn't mean better. It could be more entertaining. I won't hold the gladiator scenes in this movie up in the same regard that I hold the gladiator scenes in the first one, like the chariot fight in the first one, as much as I do with that movie, but they are really fun and they are really entertaining and they are violent and brutal and bloody, and that's what I was really missing from a Ridley Scott epic quite a bit now, because I feel like Napoleon, despite the battle scenes, felt more like a drama. The Last Duel was a bit of a drama. He hasn't directed an Alien movie since 2017. So having this big sweeping action spectacle with a giant magnitude of a scale, Ridley Scott proves he's still got it. Denzel Washington is in the movie, as I said at the beginning, and I've said this before on this channel. Denzel, in anything, just makes the movie better. He can turn a piece of shit movie into mediocrity. He could turn mediocrity into a good movie or greatness. And here, he really elevates Gladiator 2. Of course, because Denzel's presence alone just makes the movie good. He can be in the background of a scene and not say anything, and you'll just be like, holy shit, he's really good. And his character, Macrinus, is probably the best character in the entire movie, the most fleshed out character, the most developed, the one that I thought was really leading the charge. And he's the main villain. We get another Denzel villain role and Denzel just eats it up, man. He is chewing the scenery. He is scheming. He's full of treachery. He's this gangsterish slime ball. You understand, though, his motivations and why he's doing what he's doing, why he's essentially playing a chess game with the emperors, why he is essentially playing his own Game of Thrones. And I just love it in the scenes where he's just where he's watching gladiator games, because you know that in his mind he has this giant end goal, this end game goal that he is trying to achieve. It's just he doesn't really know how he's going to get there. He's a man that really plans his attack as things are happening. So he'll be watching the gladiator games and he'll be sitting there like this, just watching, and you know that he's calculating everything. He's assessing the situations. He's assessing, who can I use, who can I manipulate, who can I use as a pawn in my chess game to get to where I want to go. He is so good in this movie. The character is really good, really boosted this movie significantly. And I want to talk about Pedro Pascal, because I think Pedro Pascal, despite not being given all that much to do in this movie, I think he is one of my other favorite characters, because the movie really sets him up to be the villain of the movie. But he's not. He's actually something completely different. He has a really cool battle scene at the beginning, which is a really great way to open the movie. Then he's got a gladiator match later on in the movie, and everything in between. He's not really given all that much to do, but you learn a little bit more about him in those scenes in between those two action set pieces. And you learn that he's just a good dude. He's a general who is under the orders of the crazy ass emperors of Rome at this point, and he's really questioning every tactic that they're using. He plans with Lucilla to take Rome back. He's a man that you can sympathize with. He's a general being manipulated by the emperors of Rome, who's just a pawn in their game to try and conquer the world, and he doesn't like that. And that was a character arc that I wasn't expecting, and I thought it was one of the better character arcs in the entire movie. When it comes to making a sequel to a movie like Gladiator, obviously the term legacy sequel is thrown around. So when you have something like a legacy sequel to Gladiator or something else, there's obviously going to be throwbacks, callbacks, Easter eggs, little things, winks at the camera, maybe, or winks to the audience that will remind you of what you watched and why you love that first movie so much. And that's been a problem for a lot of people. People went into Deadpool and Wolverine and said it was just a cameo fest. People went into Alien Romulus saying it was a fan-made film. And yeah, maybe some of those people are right, but I think the point that they're missing here is that none of the stuff in that movie, except for maybe that one thing in Alien Romulus, which I won't spoil in case you haven't seen it, they're little Easter eggs that aren't shoved down your throat every 5 seconds. I think that really helps this movie differentiate it from the first one. There are callbacks, there's flashbacks, archive footage to the first movie in here, but it's never at the forefront of the movie. It never takes away from what our heroes and our characters are trying to do. It never takes away from the story that is being told on screen. It is just an added element to help propel our characters forward. And while I like all that other stuff that happens in all those movies, I think that this might be the best example as to how to do that, or one of the best examples. I think Ghostbusters Afterlife is another great example of how to do that. Let's talk Paul Mescal, because I don't want to say he was necessarily miscast, and this is where my criticisms for the movie really come in. I think he's okay in the movie. I don't think he's great in the movie. I don't think the character of Lucius is all that great. He's not all that well fleshed out. The inciting incident for the movie happens, and then that's really all that you have for development for Lucius. There's a few other things along the way where he's learning about his heritage, and when he returns to Rome, like what he's going to do when he returns to Rome, and something with Lucilla. That stuff is great, but there's just not really much to it. So I didn't have as much of an emotional attachment to the character as I did with somebody like Maximus, who was a Roman general and got betrayed by the Roman Empire because Commodus took power and had his family killed, and then he had to work his way back up to try and save the Roman Empire from corruption. I didn't have that emotional attachment to Lucius like I did to Maximus. And Paul Mescal in this movie, he's got the physicality. In the fight scenes, he is awesome. He's doing his own stunts. He's a really good sword fighter and gladiator fighter. It's just when he's delivering his lines, I feel like he delivers his lines very one note. He just has this emotionless, expressionless look on his face for a good chunk of the movie. And there was a massive disconnect from him as an actor and the way he portrayed the character and how the character was written. And that was disappointing for me. This movie is also written by the same screenwriter who wrote Napoleon. And I was very mixed on Napoleon. I think one of my criticisms, I'd have to go back and watch my review, but I believe one of my criticisms for Napoleon was that it felt like scenes ended and then scenes started in different locations with characters from previous scenes just randomly popping up in those locations. And you wonder, like, how the hell did they get there? Did they fucking teleport or something? And that's how I feel with a good chunk of Gladiator 2. At least the first 40 minutes really felt like that. I felt it was very choppy with the editing. I felt it was very choppy with how the script was written. Ridley Scott has said that the theatrical cut of Gladiator 2 is actually his director's cut, but I feel like there is more footage out there and scenes were just shortened, or maybe that's how the script was written. I have no idea, but that complaint that I had with Napoleon is my same complaint here, because there are scenes that feel so oddly paced. There are scenes that feel like they're building up to something and then they immediately cut to a different scene in a different location with different characters, or there will be a character or characters from the previous scene that will then be in the next scene, and the next scene's in a different location and you're wondering how the hell they actually got there. So there's a lot of moments in here in this movie like that, mostly in the first 40 minutes, but it's sprinkled throughout the entire thing. And I thought that it was really poorly constructed or edited in those moments, or maybe the script just wasn't as up to par as it could have been, as opposed to the first movie where it felt like everything was cohesive. It made Gladiator 2 feel a bit messier with its execution than the first one did. And the first one is damn perfect. But I think those are my major gripes with Gladiator 2. And in the fact that I didn't really vibe with Paul Mescal or the character of Lucius in this movie really holds the movie back, where I was on the journey with Maximus. Maximus is such a massively better character than Lucius is in this movie. He's not as well written as Maximus. And where he's the main hero, that's a bit of a disappointment. That is a detriment to the movie, where you don't have that connection to the hero who's trying to topple these crazy ass insane jokers of emperors and trying to stop Macrinus in his game. It was easily the weakest aspect of this movie, coupled with those weird editing choices, structure wise and script wise. Again, I was entertained by Gladiator 2. Denzel really brings it in this movie. He essentially cancels out how I feel about Paul Mescal and Lucius in this movie. He just brings it to a completely different level, and the scale and scope of this thing, Ridley Scott still has it at 86 years old. And I hope he continues to make movies well into his 90s. If he's like 100 and he's still making movies, that's going to be awesome, because Ridley Scott is awesome. And I just love his I don't give a fuck attitude anymore. It's awesome. It's like a curmudgeon-y old man. A sequel to Gladiator should be as good as the first one, which is a classic. So it begs the question, did Gladiator need a sequel? No, it didn't. Was I entertained by the sequel, and do I still think the sequel is good? Yes, but I know what I'm getting into with these legacy sequels now. I should have that expectation that they're not going to be as good. This one was still good, and if they make Gladiator 3, I hope that one's good as well. I enjoyed Gladiator 2 with a full bucket of popcorn. So if you have seen Gladiator 2 at this point, let me know what you think of it in the comments section below. I'll leave my link to my website in the description below as well. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I'll see you at the movies somewhere.